Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being here tonight, and welcome to this latest installment of Fresno Writers Live. This is an online series to celebrate new books by Fresno writers. Tonight, we're here to spend some time together in the Zoom space with Stacey Balkun and M.L. Williams and their excellent new books of poetry. So thank you very much for joining us. My name is Jefferson Beavers. I'm with the Fresno State Creative Writing Alumni Chapter on the organizing committee. And since 2016, our alumni chapter has been aimed at bringing together multiple generations of Fresno writers, both on ground and online, to celebrate the power of poetry and literature through events like these. This Fresno Writers Live series kind of started as an on-ground event. We called it Hot Off the Press, where we would get three authors, alumni authors from Fresno State with new books and have them read at a local venue. I think we did 4 of those, but then the pandemic came along and we've had to improvise into the online spaces, and we've been grateful that all of you and many other supporters have followed our authors and continue to support them and their books, even though they haven't been able to do a book tour like they used to be able to. So thanks to everyone for coming tonight. We're super grateful for this support. I just want to take a moment before we hear from our readers, Stacey and Marty, just take a few moments to briefly acknowledge today's news out of Texas. If those of you who are tuning in might not have heard, according to news reports, a gunman today opened fire at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. At least 18 children and 3 adults have been so far reported dead, with more reported injured. And Ronald and I talked a lot about this before tonight's session. We think it's very important, especially at this moment in time in our country, when it feels like so much is happening, right? Like every day, the time and the space we need to grieve and to think it feels like it's just taken from us. I feel it's important that we all just pause for just a moment together in this online space to try our best to hold just a little bit of space for grief or for thought for today's event. So I'd just like to ask everyone, please, we're going to observe a moment of silence in thought, in grieving, in rage, and whatever emotion that you need to carry for all those affected by today's news. So please, a moment of silence. Thanks, everyone, for that. Tonight, I'm pleased to welcome first your official host for this evening, the poet, Ronald Dzerigian. He's a wonderful poet and an alumnus of our MFA Creative Writing program at Fresno State. And Ronald is going to be your host tonight, properly introducing Marty and Stacey. So please welcome to the Zoom mic, Ronald Dzerigian.
Thank you, Jefferson. Can you all hear me okay? I just want to say a moment of silence is so necessary. And also we need to remember that it's not enough. One thing, however, that we can rely on is that we are here to celebrate one facet of good that human beings can produce, and that is art. And when we are such a disappointment to ourselves, this is really the one thing that we can rely on. I'm really excited to introduce both of these readers to you tonight. M.L. Williams, I'm going to refer to him as Marty. If that's okay, Marty. I don't want to get too carried away, but I'm an admirer of Marty's work. So I'll just get into the formal introduction. Marty was born in Fresno, attended and taught at Fresno High, earned degrees from Fresno State, UC Berkeley, and the University of Utah, and his poems have been published in numerous journals. As you'll soon hear, his speaker's voice is embedded with the textures of the central San Joaquin Valley. Even when he is writing about Slab City or Utah or Vermeer, we can feel this valley in it. In Game, Williams gets out the magnifying glass and dissects everything he sees. Then he evaluates. Most of the poems in this collection begin with an epigraph from Wittgenstein. There is a reason for this, but I'll leave that to the poet to elaborate or not. I first became enthralled with Marty's poems in a collection, How Much Earth, the Fresno Poets, 2001, which was also edited by him. Then again, in 2008's Bear Flag Republic, Prose Poems and Poetics from California. Side note, we share a poem title, Subject to Dust, which I discovered a while back. I personally feel a camaraderie with Williams' aesthetic, and so will you if not already. Please join me in welcoming the poet M.L. Williams.
Marty's fine. The reason I stuck with ML is because there's another Marty Williams who's writes in San Francisco, and occasionally I was being confused with her. So I went back to my old editing initials. I'll start with a poem that's not in the book. We were talking about gun violence. My brother committed suicide by gun violence, and I might read that poem later on. But I also had a student who was killed within an hour of her husband having signed an affidavit swearing that he didn't have access to a gun. He immediately went, got his gun, and killed his wife and her best friend who was hosting her. They were giving support to her. This was a difficult time, obviously, separation. Instead of reading Wittgenstein's name every time and philosophical investigations take so long, I'm just going to say epigraph. The epigraph to this poem, which is called Domestic Violence, is a shot is fired. It takes 7 inches of paper to stop a 9mm round. How thick is your restraining order? The first poem in the book is called Winter Morning. And it's interesting. A friend of mine and also John and Connie's, Terry Hummer, posted an image of a doorknob, kind of a levered handle that had been designed by Ludwig Wittgenstein. And so I love that because the first poem in my book is related in an interesting way. The epigraph. I can easily imagine someone always doubting before he opened his front door whether an abyss did not yawn behind it. Rinse the coffee cup. Set it in the sink beside the crumbed plate. Adjust your dark collar, your coat, your phone. Yes, sun in the back window, a flood off the late winter snow, flood of light, and you know it will be cracking cold. The icicles yet to find their slow drip. Light a blue trick like a surgeon's lamp when the anesthesia wears off. To go out and clear the driveway, to scrape the glass through halos of breath. Each magpie a night in itself beyond the stone threshold, its burden of pain. The first, the door. I did a few acrostic poems in the book. This was about, based on the work of Rene Magritte, and it was prompted by another epigraph. The title of the poem is Ceci n'est pas un pot, which means this is not a pot. But what if one insisted on saying that there must also be something boiling in the picture of the pot? That's the epigraph. Section 1, you need to know that Magritte did some illegal things to stay alive after the war. In section 2, I'll just get this out of the way too. Sheila refers to somebody he had an affair with. 1. The old forger might have laughed had he lived long enough to see his youthful face on the 500-franc note, recalling, after the war, printing his own banknotes, painting fake Picassos, adding the Chirico town squares to the mounting sum of the Chirico squares just to stay alive. This is, he might have said, my face. This, he might have said, is not my face. 2. What is in the pot, Renee? Sheila coyly asks. Steam rises or perhaps blows a fierce whistle. He has planned all afternoon to offer her a cup of tea with sugar or a boiled potato with butter and salt to keep her a little longer, his wife away on social calls, to talk of art or nothing at all. Nothing, he answers. It is just my upturned derby pouring out desire. It is just the river Sambre where my mother drowned. This is a poem that it's basically about insomnia. It's called Hate the Moon. This is the face he shews the world, epigraph. Frost white face cools nothing. It's notional sadness that we call it a face. Call it man when its move is from Mincy's liar moon, dark side mocking its slit-eyed cinema trick, its tidal drag up long estuaries and out, omens us in cuckolds, shimmers waves in long stabbing angles that it insists poetically, moth light and held breath, hunter and fall blues moon and owl-eyed sad music, cotton white and bull-pricked moon, voyeur moon, oh cliche moon, plague and cotillion moon, brass band under a hurricane sky, pickpocket moon, Hecate's hounds after you moon, morning rise and wine dregs moon, its gibbous promise raising a sigh, August robed in smoke and ash, guilt and smog, slow in its arc moon, eclipse moon, color of bad teeth, oh hot, this everlong night be done. Of course, we just had a lunar eclipse. I don't know if you were awake for that. Summer thunderstorm. No epigraph for this one. It's about what I learned about language here in South Georgia. Sunshine around the clouds dulls no comfort. Nimbus mushrooms, I want to say atomic, rises, spreads, blossoms like roses on old Disney shows Sunday nights before Cold War bedtime. Rains through the shine, and they say around here the devil's beating his wife. They say around here, y'all are welcome, honey, for that neighborhood is mixed, smothered and covered. We'll wash it out and lightning cracks through, terrible light, terrible light. Burn leaf piles and ropes of smoke-troubled oak branches. We don't talk about that. Loud when it breaks, but it cools, and the roads steam and the ditches run. Bless your heart, they say. Here's another ekphrastic poem. It's called Vermeer. Wonderfully, just in front of my house a couple of weeks ago, I saw one outside. I'll let that be a mystery for a minute. Epigraph. But a face in a painting looks at us too. No, not the Vermeer who painted a woman head tilted into the light as she pours light into a milk bowl beside bread. Not the Vermeer who painted the young woman you walk toward, her eyes wide, lips parted, because she wants you to come closer so you can see yourself in the shining globe of her earring dangling. Not the Vermeer whose uncertain young woman dressed in red silk seeks your advice about the wine a man urges her to drink while brooding temperance looks on. Drink the wine, you say. But this isn't about the Vermeer of Delft. This is about the Vermeer of Pella, Iowa, the Vermeer of trenchers and tree chippers and stump cutters, the Vermeer of tub grinders and power mulchers, of hay balers and pour saws and rock drills, the Vermeer sitting yellow and abandoned, listening beside the highway Sunday as you speed past, the Vermeer on Monday, hard at work on traffic stalls, and you crawl past close, and she adjusts her hard hat and looks right at you as the branch she releases becomes in this beatific morning light, dust, that Vermeer. Okay, this one's called Roast. The epigraph is, describe the aroma of coffee. Why can't it be done? And I will kind of go back to what Ron said earlier about my explanation for the use of the epigraphs, and part of it was because I studied Wittgenstein in college with Ron Searle. It always stuck with me. I came back later, found out a little bit about his personal life. He had 3 brothers who committed suicide, and I had one. So I had an emotional connection, but I also just loved the book and its playfulness, and how he looks at language as kind of a game. Rules for a game and rules for language are very comparable and sort of random. One of the things I did was use the book as a poem generator. I looked for phrases, put them at the top of the page, and made them make me write. And they worked very well. Of course, so why can't it be done? Was I took as a dare. Chocolate and a bitter touch of tar pouring through the fog of steamed milk and brown sugar. Giant cap of Cafe Roma, Berkeley, dark in a Pilsner pint glass, awake all night. High notes of dark chocolate, hazelnut, smoky kumquat meat, Papa's upper notes in the Cafe Trieste, North Beach, caffeinating the poems of the beats. Smooth, rich carob and caramel, sweet with its haunt of jasmine tea and light roast Altura Chiapas served black, with chili verde and cotija on eggs with tortillas. Cancun. Deep wild elephant dung musk and chocolate syrup funk, a dank Seattle roast on Queen Anne's Hill, knowing Shakespeare trivia is worth a quarter off. Medium cocoa and sweet bright cherry break the heart the barista draws into foam at the Palomino's Sydney. Smashed avo and toast with poached egg before we walk. The endless cup metallic, hint of vanilla when fresh on the road through Little Rock, Waffle House pork chops, eggs over easy, hash browns covered, chunked, smothered. Ludwig stalls over his melange at the Cafe Central. 3 brothers dead by suicide, a war lost. The proposition of this perfect cup. No words. Okay, 8 minutes. Basketball night. This one's called Hunahpu Panhandle, San Francisco, 1982. I have a section with titles based on gods. Hunahpu is one of the hero twins of Mayan and Aztec culture. And the epigraph is because in another sense, he is already master of the game. The burnt taste of Thunderbird rains hot down the throat, even on this cool day in Golden Gate Park where you live today, where you hold out a bottle to share, a little kick from heaven. After all, you've just kicked my young ass playing basketball, and tall and athletic as I am, I didn't think you could make the sky rain sweet threes past the top of the key, not missing the index finger on your shooting hand, not with old pants-bound legs, fake left, cross step back, the shh of the fraying net tracking your points. And I can't do anything but watch because today your game is beautiful. Sometimes the world's too much, but not today. Sunburdens fog into bright haze. In this game and you and the park are enough. Our sweat steaming the wet, cool air. So I say the only thing there is to say. Good game, man. Thank you for the wine. Okay, the third section has some elegies. First one I'll read is the one from my brother called Hat No Epigraph. Artichoke leather, wide brim to keep Coos Bay rain off the face. The sun, no roll, slim braided leather bond. Your sweat still stains the band, pinched slight in the crown flap. A solid hat to wear, salmon season pulling kings out of the coquille to smoke and grill to relieve your stress from work trimming furs. Until you were hung out by a boss who hated your union line. Spurred and harnessed, you'd hang clipped to lines 100 feet up and watch the grounded world as an osprey might. I hold it in my hand. You put a bullet in your head. The beloved smell of leather, cigarette smoke, what I have of you to hold. I won't. I can't put it on. This next one's called Calliope's. It's no epigraph. It's for Peter Otherwine and Philip Levine. And Peter saw this before he died and gave me his approval. So I'm happy with it. In your backyard, mulberry tree in full summer shag, vines up a lattice beside the table. We sip wine, speak of your lost best friend, Phil. It was hard, all you could say. Cancer, what it took from your heart, from his last days, from all of us. In the silence that must follow, 2 hummingbirds break from the tree, sip red syrup from a theater, zip back into the shadow. Calliope's, 2, you point, noting the green back, the purple-red beard, your tired voice delighted now. I thought there was only one. 2 muses, I laugh, beautiful. 2, you say, watching, and you smile. Begin a funny story about Phil. This one's called Too Much. It's for Larry Levis. Epigraph. And if you are surprised at our playing such a game, I refer you to the effect of a past experience, to the fact that a burnt child fears the fire. 2 boys issue a giggling commentary on the joy of anything burning. Too much under sycamores in the slate-hued winter sky. Smoke palls and gathers over the boys, cooking a pile of leaves with branches under a canopy of branches, pulling a spark of flame to hold out, to scribble with that spark a phrase against the green canvas of the house before them. And the boys are you and I, and a car drives past towing the slow hiss of its leaving, and leaves scatter behind it, and the rakes have given up, and piles of leaves lie gathered and burning beside the street to ash and smoke. So we're caught together in the longing of boys, and their words repeated over and over, too much, about nothing, and pointing at the trees, the houses, the wires, the crows along the wires, the street, about everything. These two words are all we ever say to each other. Two words, too much. We chant until meaning dissolves like smoke into the iron sky. Chant until we make a cult of fall and youth and fire and all the bounty of ash and dust settling and rising in the forming evening fog. After you leave, I squat beside the fire and say over and over into the dark until a leaf I pick up burning to lace in my small hand. Too much. I blow it to ash and absence. Taste in the gritty air, the good, cold, dark. Interesting fact I learned much later. I found out he took my cousin to the prom in high school. And I didn't know that till he was long deceased, and my cousin was dying of cancer. So I never got to ask her about it. But her sister was in a class with him, journalism, said he was hilarious. The last poem I'll read is Slab, the last one in the book, because I'm out of time. And this one's a little more upbeat. Slab, and to imagine a language means to imagine a form of life. That's enough of that. Heavier than you can carry, marble or granite or heart pine or fire tripper truncate, fit to raise a palace or a fort, raised to fill a doorway, slab of heavy oak fit to a warship, all of iron to the prison wall hung with rusted shackles, leveled and laid to ground to seal off hell from the nave, from the chancel, from the transept, from the choirs, slab cold on bare feet and the children run, slab off the glacier in the bay until it all melts, poured concrete into tract after tract of you could be home right now and the children run, thick cut of beef, bacon, dark rye, sharp cheddar, butter, slab on slab on slab on slab, dry rubbed and smoked, Memphis or Kansas City or Georgia baby backs or St. Louis, Texas brisket slab, toe to a pitchin' cider down the pipe, goofy-footed cook bailing a bitchin' slab in a tight barrel, spinning that Hendrix Blues slab 33 1/3 through your first perfect kiss, or slow low and banging V8 Olds Cutlass to the 110 easy all the way to Slab City to check out East Jesus. Unless the blue light sprays the rear view, just say it and we'll go. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. That was fantastic. What a great way to end it too with that poem.
Thanks, and it's good to see so many friends and some family.
Yeah, there's some great faces in this audience here. I do want to say, folks, you should get Game if you haven't already. It's a fantastic book, just phenomenal. As is Stacey's, and it's my transition to Stacey. Stacey Balkun received her MFA from Fresno State. Her works have been published basically everywhere. She won the 2019 New South Writing Contest and was included in Best New Poets 2018, and teaches creative writing online at the Poetry Barn and The Loft. I also need to say that she was a huge influence on me when I first started the MFA program. The poems that she'd share and workshop were honest, bare, and unabashedly influenced by fairy tales, which took guts, and I admired that. Here in her new book, Sweetbitter, that courage is still there, but now amplified and also simultaneously reduced and concentrated. Her work is hungry with the magic and terror of youth and of coming of age, and uses that hunger to address a great flaw of the human experience, our tendency toward the toxic, both environmental and sexual. Her speaker's journey takes us into the silence at the center of tumult. Her honesty, clarity, vulnerability, and grit tells us all that we can handle it, whatever it is for us. Reading her work reminds me that anytime we can take experience and identify and see it through a new lens is a gift. Thank you, Stacey. Please join me in welcoming the poet, Stacey Balkun.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Ronald. Is my audio okay? Can you hear me? Okay, we've had some issues earlier. I'm trying to make it work. What I wanted to say about today is that the poems in Sweetbitter just deal with growing up and focus on how it's difficult enough without these extra layers of violence that children are having to face. I'll begin with the book's epigraph, and that's that the Possumtown neighborhood of Piscataway, New Jersey is home to a former Union Carbide plant and the former Middlesex sampling plant, a testing facility for atomic bombs. And I think we have at least one Piscataway resident. One of my dreams has always been to know in New Orleans, play together yourself on this balcony. Through the woods they shimmered, telling stories that shimmered like the radio, like the oil slicks creak. In the beginning, they said, the crabapple birthed a baby girl. Or, the story goes, Lilith molded from the red clay earth, then Eve wrenched from Adam's rib. They laughed and they laughed. Bear, no bear or blackberry, just bramble. They believed mothers plucked babies from trees, wondered if they'd ever want for a man, even a kind one cursed. How could there be such a thing as happily ever after when, after all brilliant. In the heat of late afternoon, the factory blew its snowy dissonance through our woods, the chemical smell of popcorn and dryer sheets. She, a child, and until I got that she was waiting for a side of eight. I skipped church to climb trees, a possum girl, and none of us knew about the radiation or the ground flood or trees built above contaminated fill. If we could leave it all behind, simply step into a painting, we may not choose Arcadia. We could be capable of anything, just tumored, paranoid. Well, if you have lost mind, blame Union Carbide, blame the atomic bomb, Alan tells me. It's not my fault. We were all baptized above radioactive dirt, given bread and told to stay away from blood. As far as I know, the river never caught fire, but our throats itch rough enough to strike a match. This book follows these two girls running through the woods, trying to make sense of the world that they experience through the stories they've been told, which don't always line up. Two girls on fire blaze through the forest, dicks tight and closed fists, painted lips smoking, their tongues lit up like oak leaves, bronze as books of matches tucked into back pockets, their story and its ending yet unwritten. This is their last summer together, every day above 90, when the old crabapple trunk splits down the center, sat dripping through the heat of another drought, thick as the blood that stains their short, turning snap twigs into
some of y'all in the valley may not believe this, but I hate birds. I just hate them. I love nature. I don't like birds. So this is my poem called Canada Geese. I hate their V's in flight, and I hate them standing, wings open wide as they balance on gross bird feet. And I hate that they lay eggs and shit, and I don't want to know why it's green and scuffed and scattered over every field I ever ran across as a girl, uniformed in a rank jersey and shin guards. It's disgusting why I had to run across so many soccer fields to chase the geese off before a game, to avoid the boys that were always fast, always so much faster than me, always coming closer. So I take off across green acres, that rutted throng of fields behind the high school, pocked and faded with chalk lines, and I'd run to the tree line, underbrush colonized by the fucking geese and their nests, so aggressive while I had only mucked cleats and a stick for defense. And no, I never offered anything, not even a gulp of spring water or a quartered orange, just covered my ears against their awful sound, all of the terrible noise they made, honking and hissing with their dry, black tongues. Just have a couple more for y'all. This is called Plants I Didn't Know Until After. Plants I didn't know until after. Sycamore and sweet gum gifting their spiky pods. Blue hydrangeas blooming like moons. Turkey fig, delicious wattle and spread of each huge leaf. Cypress with its elbows and knees gasping for air. Joshua tree profiting along the side of the highway. Bird of paradise and its violent beaks. Juniper berries before they're crushed into gin. Apple pear bearing fruit that's both and neither. Loquat, which I still don't understand. White peach and the pit's bloody center. Blood orange with its red juice running. Star jasmine trying to smudge the night clean. Kumquat and the crunch of rind under dull teeth. How wicked it feels to chew each orange whole. There's one poem in Sweetbitter that's a cento. So all these lines have been taken from other sources. They're not original, but in the sense of community of coming together tonight, it feels really important to read from a bunch of different sources. So thanks y'all for being here and being a part of this. And it's a cento called Conservation Effort. And some of these lines have come from poems. Louise Glick is in here. Some have come from nonfiction books about the Meadowlands and the landscape of Sweetbitter, central New Jersey. So that I think comes through in here too. Night covers the pond with its wing. No place to go now, but into deep ground. Absences allow us one power over them. You have to imagine a shadow hill hiding inside. The water is a mess. The world is blue at its edges and in its depths. The water seems suspended, the geese flying low over the marsh. We say of them what we want, reaching out for the unlimited. Even now, this landscape is assembling. It's truth against truth. Sometimes we miss the things we have lost, even if we love the water we swim in now. I'm going to close with a poem that's not in Sweetbitter, but I've been going on a lot of restorative camping trips to survive the pandemic. So this is called Pearl River. Even after the sun lifts and does its best to burn off the fog risen around the clearing, it clings to the banks. Bruised by your hip bones, by the hard ground, still asleep, you sense my wake and pull me close. We are tidal, we are brine. My body wants to be by your body. Why can't we? If I'm trying to be honest, this is a story. A quick prayer for the oysters purchased last night from the bed of a pickup truck to shuck for breakfast. I don't know the difference between a white oak and a water oak, between Deer Island and Cedar Key. Is this goldenrod? Is this gold? I call it an obad, but neither of us leaves. You are sharp, I gleam. Thanks y'all so much.
Stacey, that was fantastic. Even though there was technological issues there. So, but what a great poem to end it tonight. Thank you. We would like to use the next few minutes as a Q&A session. And I have a few questions, but really, you know, I don't like to hear myself talk. And I'm more interested in hearing questions from the audience, but I have some, and Jefferson has one that's great too. So we'll start with Jefferson's question, actually, which I think is fantastic and a great way to start this. Since Connie is here, sorry, Connie. But here's the question. It's actually for both of you. You're both poetry students of Connie Hales. How do you carry Fresno with you in your own teaching? How do you carry Connie with you in your own teaching and in your poems? And how does Fresno inform your poetry, either directly or indirectly? That's a lot, I know, but it's a great question from Jefferson. So hopefully you both have answers to that one.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. I'm older. And yeah, when I got to Fresno State, I was teaching at Fresno High. My former students looked, I was in the audience tonight from Fresno High. But Connie was the new young teacher, and she was full of energy, and she was laid back, and she was cool, and I always felt really at home in her workshops. You know, you go into Phil's workshop and you're kind of, no matter what, you're a little bit intimidated, at least at the beginning of every class. You knew how to break that down and use it. But in Connie's classes, I felt like I was walking into a living room and hanging out and having one of those wonderful conversations about poetry. And you know, it was a very affirmative workshop, and everybody kind of supported each other. Something I took with me when I went to Utah, we had these troubles there, and then with certain people, and we kind of pointed that out and kind of said what we wanted. But my workshops now are, you know, obviously there's a little bit of Pete, you know, kind of his Buddhism and his distance. There's a little bit of Phil, and you know, saying, look, you can't do that, you know, this is why. But a lot of it, you know, trying to make people comfortable, especially in a situation that's so often fraught for people, so emotionally delicate. And I always felt like I could try anything in Connie's workshop, and I hope I can pass that along to students to feel like they can try anything too. Your turn, Stacey.
Oh, I'm so glad this is turning into a Connie Love Fest. I mean, to be really general at first, like what I've brought with me is just the sense of community. Fresno is like nowhere else in that regard, and the support and joy for what we do and what it means to be writers together, and the love that goes into that. It's really special, and it doesn't exist everywhere. I'm currently involved in 2 different MFA programs in 2 different capacities right now, and they don't have what we have. And I talk about it all the time. People say, like, Fresno, how'd you end up in Fresno? And I'm just like, why aren't you in Fresno right now? Connie brings such a joy to the room, and no matter what is on that paper, what sense of order or where these words are, that's what we're doing, in the most basic way is looking at words on a page. There's such a comfort in that room that you could take risks, you can bring whatever, and that's really special. And that's what I try to bring with me too. Your turn, Ronald.
My turn. My turn to ask another question. So no, that's great. That's great to hear from both of you. And I'm so glad that Jefferson asked that, because I was thinking the same thing. There's, I get a little bit obsessive about the lineage and the legacy of Fresno Writers. So I don't want to get carried away. So, but I do want to. I have a question that is selfishly driven. And Marty, you got me thinking about this when you said that I believe you worded it as a challenge or a dare, that you would begin each poem in this collection, or most of them in this collection, with Wittgenstein as a way to just sort of start a poem. That's great. I'd like to hear more about that. But the question is for both of you, which is, because I'm obsessed with this, how do you begin a poem?
Let's clarify that. How do you begin a poem that you're reading, or how do I begin to write a poem?
Good, thank you. How do you begin to write a poem? Yeah. Okay,
that's different, because a lot of times the beginning of the poem you read is not the beginning of the word.
Thank you.
And sometimes well, at first stanza's got to go. I should have started this at this ending is where it really begins, and I'm going to flip it upside down. That's all those things happen. But what I did was I was doing the grind. I don't know if anybody done the grind, Ross White's gathering of poets, where you sign on to do a poem a day for 30 days for a month. I was doing that, and I was like, the first time I did it, it was hard. And then I said, I'm going to do it again. How am I going to do this again? I need help. And Wittgenstein was my help. I found a copy of Philosophical Investigations online, and I remembered all the weirdnesses to it, and the duck rabbit and all that stuff. And so I just would randomly go around and pick out phrases, stick it at the top of the page, and try to let it pull things out of me that I wouldn't have pulled out on my own, because you can become so focused and subject driven that you miss the stuff that's really interesting. And I let him help me with that. So it was kind of a game. And also, sometimes I cheated, I'm going to admit, and he doesn't talk about cheating in that book, but several of the poems have epigraphs that I added later, just because they fit. But most of them, where I put them up, and I have a lot more of them, obviously, are in the book. But yeah, it helped me put words on the page, and some of them worked out. So it was, game. It was kind of a game, but a serious one. Your turn, Stacey.
I feel like writing poems used to start with image and sound more often for me, and lately it's been concepts. I'm in a critical PhD program right now, so maybe that's why my brain's been forced to do more of this theoretical thinking. But I'll just have an idea. I'm like, ooh, I hope I write that someday, and then it'll be a long time past before an image or an idea comes, and the words slowly. I've been a really slow writer lately, like 5 or 6 words at a time over the course of a few weeks, and then I have 30, and I'm like, I can call this a poem. but I'm really inspired by narrative poems. I like the idea of telling a story in such a short space. So reading those will get me going sometimes. But it's become a very slow process lately.
I like that you both sort of are talking about the two essentials, which is the rigor and the finding a way to rigorously work on writing, and then also the necessary pause or the breathing in period where we it's okay to write 5 words and come back to it later and think conceptually about it. I like that you're both sort of examining a balance between those two things. All right, so I have another question then, and this one's for Stacey. Some of your poems in Sweetbitter are erasures of lyrics by bands, musicians such as The Cure and Sleater-Kinney. I see this as an excavation, as a way to make something that already exists in the world solely your speakers, almost like excavation and alteration of land. Sorry, that's a lot. Can you tell us about your process and reasoning here with these erasure poems?
Yeah, it's interesting you noted those two, because that project started with the Toadies' Possum Kingdom, which I don't know if y'all remember this song from the 90s, but it's like it's a pretty driving song. It's like really sing-alongable, and I have all these memories of like singing, like my dad blasting it on the radio in the car and us like singing along together. And you know, as I was starting this project, the neighborhood I grew up in is called Possum Town. That's not made up. And the song's called Possum Kingdom. And I was like, I should listen to that song again. And it's awful. Like the narrative is literally like a man speaking to a woman saying, come with me to the boathouse or else I will treat you well, my sweet angel, or help me, Jesus. Like, bro. So I was thinking about how these narratives that are in our lives to this point where we don't notice them. Like I'm so steeped, like my dad and I sang that together, and just how dangerous story is and how it informs our lives in these ways. And I wanted to get to the point of like, what are these songs really saying? Like, how can I dig through what's hiding the danger within, if that makes sense? And that's kind of the way I treat fairy tale too in this book. But then some songs I loved had to go in there for balance as well. And they all kind of have thematic connections between the woods and imagery of animals and the natural world too. Thank you for asking that. I'm glad to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm interested in the idea that of taking away from something that we love. That the Toadies song, certainly yes, but then the songs that we love that really speak to us. What, you know, because that's an interesting relationship to have with like picking and choosing what will stay and what will go. So I was particularly drawn to those poems. I love, Marty, I love your prose poems. They're masterful, and I'm fascinated by the prose poem. And this is maybe a tough question, and maybe again a little too broad, but what can a prose, from your perspective, what can a prose poem accomplish that a poem that breaks the line can't?
Well, I would put it a little differently. It can accomplish everything a lined poem can, but it's hobbled by that handicap in a certain way. And you have to find other ways to destroy time, to use Larry Levis's phrase. And that means, I kind of wrote about it in an essay that's in Bear Flag Republic, which you have to break the syntax or the tense, or you have to suddenly change the setting. And this is why a lot of, for me, the most successful prose poems are a little bit weird. They feel like broken narratives, and that's kind of what they are. But that's one of the things I try to. It's hard to teach a student that, but it's interesting that I was able to ask them, well, where does this change suddenly? and they would be able to identify a dozen places where it changed so that the narrative was broken up. And in that way, you can do with a prose poem some of the same, a lot of the same things that a line poem can. But it's a challenge to do that because, and students do this when I say, write a prose poem, and they'll write this little block, block of text. And I say, well, that's wonderful. It's a short story. That's wonderful. It's a micro essay. And these are wonderful things to write, so don't feel bad about this at all. You're not challenging the temporal tyranny of the sentence, which is what poetry does. And so a prose poem has to find ways to do that, even though it's stuck in that maze of the sentence. If that makes any sense at all. I don't know if it does, but
that does. It makes a lot of sense. Fight the tyranny, right?
Yeah.
So some of my questions tonight have been focused on process. I'm obsessed with that, and I apologize. But part of process is also looking forward too. So, what are you both doing now, and see yourselves doing now in the realm of poetry? Not now, but yes, now, and also the soon to be now. Does that make sense? So what are you working on is how I can simplify that.
That's a hard question to answer. Sweetbitter was a long time coming. It was a finalist in many contests. Like, many years went by where it was a book without being a book, and then the pandemic slowed down the release. And right now, I just kind of want to give this baby the space it needs. And when the poems come next, they'll come. But I think it's okay that that's my now. How about you, Marty?
I'm in the same place. To ask this question when I'm still, processing the fact of this thing. It's only came out in November, so it's all new, and trying to get it out. A couple trips, doing readings, trying to, and I have a small press, so there's no marketing, and so doing that is what I'm doing really. And I will need some space between this book and the next, to figure out. Otherwise, I'll just, write the same book again. So a little time is necessary, to get and to let this have its life for a little while.
Breathing room. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you both very much for being here. It was amazing to hear you both read. I do want to offer, Stacey, since we lost your first few poems, I want to offer you a minute or two. A minute or two is not enough, but if you'd like to read an additional poem. All
right, this was just the last poem that was written for this book, and so it seems like a great place to end. It's another abad for lying fallow. What else is left to say about the grass? A body is a body, a field unpartitioned. A field is not two curtains meeting, draped in soft overlap. And I am holding my composure, a drawstring, waiting for your touch. We are all meant to be parted. The grass too was meant to be parted. I'm learning how to open. You are walking away. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Stacey. That was great. What a fantastic way to end the evening. And thank you all for being here.